Okay, thank you for coming and thank you for joining online. We have Emma today. So Emma has a great background. She's a lawyer, also has a master in environmental management, and she had a very successful career in law. I know it because of my girlfriend. My girlfriend told me. My girlfriend is studying law and she has talked with Emma and she has told me how good Emma was, but she wanted to do something for the environment, so she made a career shift, and now she's doing her PhD to try to contribute with the environment and so on. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Herman. That was an unexpected reference. Welcome, everyone, to my talk today on landowner perspectives on significant tree registers. This is one part of my PhD on improving urban canopy cover in Australia. And just before we start, I do want to mention that this research did involve a series of interviews, and just be aware that actually one of the interview participants has joined us today. So they are a bit incognito because they're actually from UWA. So it could be any one of you. But I will give it away. It's actually Dr. Bruce Webber who's joined us today on that. So welcome to Bruce and thank you. Just a brief recognition of the Whadjuk Noongar people, the traditional owners of the land which we're meeting on today, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. So to get started, urban canopy cover in Australia, this is the general topic for my PhD. Hi, Alex. And I'd just like to begin with a little summary of the benefits and the disservices of urban trees. So the key benefits really, and cooling is coming into one of the main ones that everyone's researching these days, biodiversity support, and a big one is health and well-being, particularly post-COVID. A lot of research has been on how green spaces improve our well-being. And since we're a highly urbanised nation, this is really important. There are some downsides to urban trees. They litter, they cause property damage by their roofs and by their roots and by limbs falling. And there is a personal safety risk with trees because limbs do fall and trees do fall. But overall, it's generally accepted that the benefits outweigh the disservices. So canopy cover is generally in decline in our cities. So there were a series of assessments done by a research team in Melbourne who looked at assessing Australia-wide canopy cover in urban areas, and they did assessments in 2013, 2016 and 2020. This showed it to be an overall decline. So 2013 to 2016 it went down quite a lot, and between 2016 and 2020 when there was a lot of interest in improving canopy cover, some areas did go up a little bit, and overall it increased a tiny bit, but not enough to get to above the 2013 levels. So it's still in overall decline. And the general perception was that it was related to problems with private land. So local governments are setting quite ambitious canopy targets, usually between 30 and 40%. And there's now very recent research come out this year saying that those targets are basically impossible to meet using public land alone. So there's a little asterisk there. That's because the second study mentioned there did say, well, if you can put a big reserve, a conservation reserve through the middle of a suburb, then we can probably get to the target using public land. But that would be a above normal increase in the public land available. So based on the ordinary amount of public land allocated in a suburban development, such as the one you see in the picture there, those targets are impossible to meet and you need to rely on private land. Okay. So there are two main methods for individual trees. The first one is blanket protections, which are a kind of protection which covers all trees in an area, usually by tree size, but sometimes also by location. And it's more common in some states than others, by which I mean WA is lagging. The other way is significant tree registers, which is what this study is looking at, where trees are protected once they're registered. So an individual tree must actually be placed on a register. These registers don't always apply to private land, and they usually involve a nomination, which is either by the landowner and in some instances by a third party such as the council. Either way of protecting trees, the approval is required to remove it once it's a protected tree, and there's limited research on either of these methods and how they work. And the picture there is a picture I took in Perth City, which shows how this whole thing started. So significant tree registers, my research was to try and investigate the use of what I shorthand call STRs, and that research has been conducted in two parts. First of all, a website review, which is a review of the use of STRs by local government. I've covered New South Wales, Victoria and WA, and within that 92 urban local governments in my website review. I've also conducted a series of interviews with landowners with registered significant trees to get their perspective. That covered 9 local government areas that had STRs, and it was a total of 18 interviews in a semi-structured format. And that is a tree that is not protected because it's in Claremont, and the website review reveals there are no blanket protections or significant tree registers available in Claremont. So my website review went like this. For each local government of 92, I went to the website and I looked at each of these factors and recorded what there was next to that, the data that was relevant to that local government. So you can see I've done, do you have a significant tree register? What date was it? Does it include private land? Is it standard or extended? By that I mean ordinarily significant tree registers focus on heritage or size of the tree, but some local governments extend the definition now to include climate change effect and biodiversity support. So if it's extended, it means they've thought about it and actually extended the definition a bit wider. Whether landowner consent is needed, this is about who can nominate the tree. Sometimes anyone can nominate, but the landowner has a right of veto, in which case I would say landowner consent was needed, even though other people can nominate it. Then I would, where possible, record the total number of trees, the number of trees on private land, whether there were incentives for people who owned significant trees, and what that incentive was. So from this website review, I can tell you that STRs are very difficult to find. They are not straightforward. Every single one was different. So the way it was done was different. Some were by maps, some were by lists, some were by links that you had to click through. Some were minimal, others very detailed. Sometimes it was very difficult to tell how many entries there were, and particularly how many related to private land. And tree numbers differed from entry numbers. So this was a thing I didn't realise at the beginning. I thought you'd find a number, but sometimes one tree, for example, might be in the corner of a garden, and the local government actually lists all the addresses that the tree covers in geographic terms. So it might have 4 addresses for one tree. And in other instances, one address might have 3 or 4 trees because actually the person has got quite a few significant trees in their garden. So tree numbers and entry numbers are slightly different. That did add some limitations, I think, to my study, because my numbers are a kind of a best estimate based on the factors I was working with. Right. This is just an example of 2 significant tree registers. So this one that you can see here, this is the City of Vincent. That is the entire significant tree register right there. I mean, it's too small to read, but it does list out the areas where these trees are. And you can see this is the private land ones. So you've got 9 addresses and you've got the species of tree that's been registered. So that's one. That's a very minimal tree register. This one, which is an extract from a Victorian location in Glenara, this is one page of about 200. So they had about 200 odd trees listed, and you can see the amount of detail they've gone into about that tree. So just to give you an idea of the types of things I was finding when I went through. Okay, so
How would you know which tree that is?
oh, which one? Yeah, yeah. And whether there's more than one or no, there's not much information there. Okay, so these are my key findings. Of the 92 local governments, 43 had significant tree registers and 34 included private land. The numbers of registered trees on private land varied from 0, quite a few had 0, even though they allowed registrations, they didn't have any, to over 1,000. And you can see from this graph on the top right that the one with over 1,000 was a real standout. It was quite unusual. Most LGAs had less than 100. You can see that from that graph as well. There was a large variation by state. Victoria was by far the highest in terms of private registered trees, and WA was by far the lowest. LGAs not requiring landowner consent had higher registration numbers. That makes sense because the council has the right to go in and just nominate your tree regardless of what you say about it. And you can see this graph here shows the difference in average number of trees registered, where there was landowner consent not needed or consent needed. And there were some where it just wasn't clear, I couldn't tell. So I've listed those as well just to show there was some that I couldn't tell which category they fell into. But you can see there's a big difference. So where landowner consent was needed, the average number of trees registered was 3, which is not very much. And 6 of the LDAs, that's local governments, offered incentives or assistance to landowners, so not very many. Okay. So this research on the websites also allowed me to design my interview research. So I chose 9 local government areas. I had the canopy cover assessment data from 2013, 16 and 2020. I used the 2020 data to classify areas as low, medium or high canopy. And from that, I tried to get a kind of selection of local governments that would cover low canopy, medium canopy, high canopy, and each state as well. So those were the ones I selected. The numbers next to them relate to the responses. So the number next to each one is the responses I received, and in the brackets is the number of interviews I conducted from that selection. So it just gets you to your 18. I did send letters to 184 potential participants.
What was a participant? A private landowner?
Yeah,
Private
landowner, yeah. So you remember how the City of Vincent, well, they list the addresses. So I just wrote letters to, well, a selection of the addresses, and this was the response that I got, which was quite good, really. So, so here's a nice picture taken by Alex. That's me at an interview. The interviews covered 5 topics. We looked at the reason for registering the tree, positive outcomes, negative outcomes from registration, desirable incentives or assistance, and generally the overall experience of owning a registered tree. And yes, this was one in the City of Vincent where I was able to do the interview in person, so that was quite good. Thank you, Alex.
And dodge the mosquitoes.
Yes, there were a few mosquitoes. So these are the results from the interviews. So on the first topic, what I discovered was that landowners were largely indifferent about who nominated the tree. Some of them couldn't even remember whether they nominated it or it was just a council nomination. Where it had been a council nomination, many mentioned that this helped them in dealing with neighbours who didn't like aspects of the tree, like leaf litter or risk of limb falling. They could say, well, it wasn't my fault, I didn't register it, the council did. And they quite liked that. Where it was nominated by landowners, it was typically for tree protection from neighbours. So originally I thought that landowners would nominate so that when they sold the property, the tree would go on to be protected. But the vast majority of them where this had happened said it was really for tree protection from neighbours. In fact, one interviewee said that the whole existence of the tree register where she was living was for her to protect her trees from a big neighbouring development. Oh my goodness, I've only got 5 minutes left.
2 more.
Thank you, Herman. I get 2 more minutes because of the questions. Keep asking questions, then we can just keep carrying on. Okay. One had attempted to remove a tree from the register, and that's what this picture is. This is the tree where the owner there had tried to remove it from the register, and you can see why. The tree there is probably a quarter of the way through its life and is very, very close to the property, and she was very worried about that. And one person didn't even know they had a registered tree till they got our letter. So there was a wide variety in registration process knowledge. Positive and negative outcomes. Peace of mind was the main one expressed. People liked that it was registered because they had that peace of mind. They wanted to help combat development proposals. That asterisk was for the point I made before about, in one case, it was actually the whole register was brought into existence to help do that. They expressed significant pride in tree ownership. Some mentioned that they felt it gave them an increased social status. There was an increased difficulty and cost in maintaining the tree because, for example, they were required perhaps to use only a particular type of arborist or to get an assessment every time they wanted to do anything to the tree. And interestingly, very few thought land value was reduced or mattered, and a couple thought that their land value was increased. Incentives or assistance. So these, I've kind of grouped these into financial, information and recognition. I won't really spend too much time on it, but the recognition one was one that came out and was a surprise for me because a lot of people mentioned it. And it occurred to me as well that there's overlap between these. For example, a rates rebate for significant tree owners would not only provide them with some contribution towards the cost of owning a tree, but would provide a community recognition of it as well. And I think there's a few overlaps there between them, but information and recognition were actually equally important to a financial contribution to most people. Overall experience of owning a tree, most of them were happy. Government intervention, they all felt it was a necessity to have that to protect urban trees and thought more could be done by the governments. And that was a nice little quote from one of the participants. So, rushing along here. So the key findings from the interviews, actually I'm just going to skip this one because we don't have a lot and I've mentioned most of it already. And I'm going to talk about the topics the themes which are coming out in terms of a discussion, which is looking at STRs and urban canopy cover, STRs as a component of an urban forest strategy and improving STR functions. So first of all, this one will interest this audience particularly, I think. The relationship to canopy cover was something I was quite interested in exploring. And so I did have, as I said, that canopy data. And what I was very keen to do was see, well, if you have more private trees listed in an area, does that mean you've got higher canopy cover? And so I checked with 2020 and it wasn't perfect because the year was 2020 versus 2025. But what I got was this graph at the top right. It basically shows there's no real correlation. There's nothing going on. And I was really disappointed that that was the case. I would have liked it to show something more in a line, but it did not. There are a couple of things to note about that. I mean, obviously there's limitations, but I actually think this is showing us something else. And when you look at this chart here, so this is different. This is that same graph I showed you before, but with an overlay of the canopy percentage that's average for those groups of LGAs. And what you can see is an 8% difference between the ones where landowner consent is needed and where landowner consent is not needed, which is interesting to me because it shows to me that it's effectively taking the top ones of this chart up the top, and it does have an impact when you look at it that way. And I'm wondering, why is that? That's really interesting. There's an evidence here of a canopy relationship to landowner consent. And I'm wondering if that relates to the underlying community values. And I think there's more research needed on that. It's an interesting factor. Looking at STRs as a component of a wider urban forest strategy. So some earlier research, international, had suggested that champion quality trees should be the backbone of a canopy cover. Sorry, I'll be 1 more minute. And that STRs would function, could function as this, a kind of tree register, not as the only protection for trees, but as the foundation protection for trees in an area. And these are the things I think would be needed for that with our STRs that we have in Australia. You'd need a plan. You'd need to extend to environmental reasons as well. You'd have to include younger trees, not just limit to older trees. You'd have to allow council nominations so it could be done in accordance with the plan. You'd need landowner buy-in because you need them to protect the trees as well. And you'd have to have a system of strong enforcement. Think, for example, if one of these plans had applied to that forest field picture that I showed you at the beginning, if you had this as part of that development idea, it would have looked different. And the last one, improving the functionality of significant tree registers. So I think they could be improved following these interviews in a raft of different ways, but these are particular ones. First of all, I think allowing council nominations is really important. I think the councils need to be proactive with their recruitment. I think registration should be easy, quick and inexpensive. I think that reinforcing protection against neighbouring development is important. For example, if it can take 6 months between nomination and registering a tree, that development you're trying to stop could go ahead in that time, so you might need an interim protection so that as soon as a tree is nominated, it's protected until the decision is made, and repeated notifications to neighbours so that they're aware of the status of the tree. It would be helpful to publicise the existence of the significant tree register, and also I think at the very least providing greater recognition for participating landowners and possibly other incentives. And there's a couple of nice quotes there. So at the top one, this was one where the house was actually bought because of the tree. And this was another one where this was the person who didn't know that they had a significant tree at all until they got our letter. And that's a thank you. And I want to just make a special thanks to my supervisors, Ram and Alex Gardner, who's here, Stephen Willey, who I don't think managed to join us. But a special thanks to Alex because of the interview that he attended with me and braved some mosquitoes in that one. We were warned, but we did not take the warning. And just to leave you with a few more quotes while we go through question time, so you can read those.
Okay, thank you very much. That was great. Are there any questions from the PhD colleagues?
Hi, Maury. Yes.
Yes, I just want to know for the STR system, how, I mean, like in general, like how the situation, like the public would know the system, or like it's a very common like strategy they know, or just that it's very probably not a lot of people never heard of that. Yeah, so.
That is a good question, and that is actually a question that a couple of participants said. Like one didn't even know that they had a registered tree until they got our letter. And then they went to try and find it, and it was listed in some parts of the website and not on others. And I think a lot of this could be really easily fixed. I mean, there are obviously newsletters that go out from local governments. This could be easily publicised, and a lot of participants suggested that this should be done more regularly. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, Emma. Thanks for your nice presentation. I just wanted to know, what are the factors influence more for higher registration by the landowners? Like, is it just like incentive or the community networks or anything else?
The main factor for when the landowner was registering, so that the main factor for that was to protect the tree, often from immediate threat from a neighbouring development. So a neighbour who wanted to build right to the boundary, chop all the trees' roots and prune everything from the boundary line in order to put their swimming pool in or a new development of apartments or something, and the landowner would be very worried that this would kill the tree. Even though the tree is on their land, it would be killed by that development. So they would nominate it for the register in order to protect the tree.
Yes, so it's very nice presentation.
Thank you.
So I'm just excited about the graph from canopy cover and private tree numbers that you said.
Yes.
We didn't expect that because it shows that it has no correlation.
I'm going to take a guess here. Oh, no. Oh. Hang on. Wrong guess. No, wrong guess.
The graph.
No, that was not. That was a previous one. Oh, here we go. I'll just have to flick through. This one.
Yeah,
This one is what you're talking about. Yeah.
It's interesting to me as well because we expect that they have correlation in some ways, right? So
Yes.
do you think if for example you manage another method of data collection,
Yeah.
for example, it include other suburbs or something to add in your data, it can change your graph results here? Do you think?
Yes,
Because,
I think
yeah.
I think one of the biggest factors that's not shown here, and my later research will work this in as well, is the effect of those local governments that have got blanket protections as well. Remember I mentioned there were two types of protecting trees? This is focusing only on one, but there's another one, and that's not showing up in these because I'm not addressing it. But I think when we look at that as well, it will show a different picture. It will be more complete.
It
Yeah.
might be that that's causing that relationship rather than the actual registration itself.
Possibly, but there was some really interesting research in the US that said when you protect heritage trees, there's a kind of, it reflects a kind of cultural understanding of that, and that in itself is enough to show up in canopy cover statistics. So I was really hopeful we'd have that as well, but it's possible. It's until I work that in, it's hard to know. Yeah.
All right, we have 2 questions to go and 2 minutes to go and 2 questions online. So
I'll ask it later.
I will ask mine later as well. Cheryl asked, what are the implications for accidentally, deliberately killing an STR?
For accidentally.
Accidentally, deliberately killing
Oh, a
STR.
registered tree. Oh, okay. Yes. That is a really interesting question. That's one of the other things that's not covered here, which is about enforcement levels. So it depends a lot. There's no specific answer to that. It depends on the local government you're in and the state you're in. The penalties vary enormously. So in New South Wales, for example, the maximum penalty is over $1 million. If it went through court and went through the right processes. But in Western Australia, I think that maximum is about $250,000, and your normal kind of infringement penalty is something more like $500. So it depends is the answer.
And one last.
If it went through court. So I think most local governments have got the power to issue like a parking infringement kind of thing, but that would be quite low. But if they decide to take it to court, then the higher penalties can be applied.
One last question. For the councils that did not require owner approval for listings, was there any evidence of mass removal of trees between when that policy was announced and when it was enforced? That's from Bruce Weber.
Bruce, that's a really interesting question. I don't have an answer. There was some research done in Poland, which said something about voting by chainsaw, which was the government there took away tree protections and took them away for 10 years before reinstating them. And in that 10-year period, the tree canopy cover went down significantly on private land. And then it kind of got raised up again once they got brought in. So someone has done some empirical work on that. In Australia, no one's done that work to know. There's anecdotal evidence that yes, people do remove their trees when they think a policy is coming in.
All right, is your question very quick? No? Okay, then we'll stop here.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Thank you very
Okay.
much for coming.
Thank you.
And we can